Hey everyone, and welcome back to my ongoing Mistborn series. In today's video we are going to be talking about book 3, the final in the first era of Mistborn, and the end of the trilogy, The Hero of Ages. It may not be who you thought it was, or who I thought it was necessarily. Right off the bat, I just want to say I really enjoyed this book. There were some moments that felt like there were lulls in the story, but I think because it jumped around more than the previous book between characters, and they were in different locations as well, it made Brandon feel more like he had to reintegrate us into people when we met them again. Especially Vin, because she was more of a side character, honestly, in this book. For a lot of it anyway, or some of the early book. So, there were some lulls, but overall, the highs really overcame the lulls. And I was managing to predict a lot of the events that did occur, but rather than the twists surprising me, I was more surprised by the epic moments, the fantastic stuff. I got really emotional a couple of times, which I'll go into in more detail as this video goes, but if you're familiar with my book reviews or discussions, you'll know that I jump all over the fucking place. I have no sense of how to keep something organised, even though I've got a list of characters and honourable mentions and plot lines here. My brain just jumps around all over the place, so that's how it's gonna go, basically. So, spoilers for the first era of Mistborn, of course. If you didn't realise, I'm going to be talking about not just events from the Hero of Ages, but probably events from book 1 and 2 as well, just to talk about the series in general, now that I've completed the trilogy. So we open up with Elend, now an Allomancer, travelling, I believe, to a southern mining town to rescue it from an attacking army of Kolos. However, he does have an ulterior motive, and once Vin shows up to join him as well, and they wreck some Kolos together for a while, the Inquisitor eventually shows up that's controlling the Kolos, and they take care of him, and then they take control of the Kolos army using Duralumin enhanced pushes of soothing, or writing, whatever you want to call it. So they end up saving this little village, the mining village, and going into a storage cache that is left hidden beneath the Canton building, the Steel Ministry building. And in these stashes, it turns out that the Lord Ruler has been hiding resources, food, water, blankets, literally everything you can need to survive, metals, which of course in this world very important, but allomantic metals specifically. Also, he's leaving behind these big steel tablets with clues written in them and maps written in them to get whoever finds the first one to find the rest of them, because there's 5 of these different caches dotted around. And he's also trying to explain that he knew the day would come eventually when Ruin, who we learn to be the dark force that was trapped inside the Well of Ascension, he knows that Ruin will eventually find a way to kill him, and the people of that planet are gonna need as much help as they can get, so he's been preparing and leaving all this stuff in the case of his death. And we learn that this is the 4th out of the 5th cache that they've found so far. So they found a bunch of stuff and they've managed to recover 3 of them. However, one of them in Urto is inaccessible. They've scouted it, but they can't get the resources out of it because it's in the middle of a city controlled by a guy called the Citizen, who we'll go into a bit more later. But essentially, the 5th cache they now find the location of, and find it's in Fadret City, which is where Set comes from, and Set has been asking them to go back and conquer the West since he turned up. So he's pretty happy about that, because it means they have to go there, and they think that the 5th cache is going to contain something really important, possibly even the Lord Ruler's missing ATM supply. which is still out there. We don't know where at this moment. Shortly after they find this cache, we find out as well that the Mists have been killing more and more people. They tell the villagers, basically, you're going to have to come back to Luthadel with us, but first you're going to have to go and stand out in the mist and see if you die. They kill some people, they don't kill everyone. Not everyone that gets sick gets killed, but yeah, you have to go and see if you can survive it. Otherwise you'll never make the walk, and you'll end up trapped in the mists inside this town with another Kolos army eventually coming in. So everyone goes back north to re-meshing Luthadel. Turns out Spook has been scouting Urtur, where the third cache is that I mentioned a minute ago. So he's off there at the minute anyway, and Sazid and Breeze, I believe, at this point, they were going to make a pact with someone, but I can't remember who it was. It didn't turn out to be that relevant in the end. It might have been Likal, like Justice's father, I don't know. But they're basically under duress anyway. And Sazed is... I looked up how to pronounce it. Sazed is... he's broken. He's lost his faith, and he's lost Hindwell, and he doesn't know what to do with himself, and it's quite painful. We follow him in this book as he is looking through all of the religions that he's gathered and learned of and preached for all these years, and he's looking through them for inconsistencies so that he can rule them out as non-existent. As a logical atheist in real life, I understand, I get it. I've never been a man of faith, is what it is. I'm not meaning to turn this into a religious discussion, but even as a man of logic, I can see how for a man of faith to lose his faith, that's going to be devastating for him. Even though I don't understand what that faith was really in the first place. And there's a lot of discussion of faith and religion in this book and what it means, and it comes from Sazed. And he's my favourite character. He has been since the start. I thought he's really wise, he's noble. He does what has to be done, and he's kind of funny as well. He's got a bit of a sense of humour, so I don't mind that in a character. But Sazed and Breeze end up getting sent to Urtur, where Spook is, to try and help him take control of the city so that they can get the supplies out of the Lord Ruler's cache and back to Luthadel, because the Mists seem to be enclosing on Luthadel, killing the Outer Lands first. While all this is going on, we actually get to take the point of view of not a new character, but a new point of view character, Tensoon the Kandra, which is awesome. Because I was hoping that Tensoon would come back. I was hoping he wouldn't just run off to his people and then never appear again. And he did come back. Well, not come back necessarily. He reappeared in the pages through a point of view, trapped in a cage, subjugated by his own people, and he was about to be killed, but then he demanded a trial, like a trial by justice or something. So we start to learn more about the Kandra through Tensoon's perspective, as he is trying to navigate his way out of being locked up, basically. And he says he could escape at any time, but like he was there of his own will. At least that's how he sees it anyway. I don't know how true that is. He does eventually manage to orchestrate his own escape, but before all that, he gets into like a war with this second generation. So Tensoon is from the third generation, and basically the first generation at the top, they don't speak to anyone but the seconds. They're all mysterious in their ivory towers, and they're the bosses. But the seconds are the ones who like actually run all the rest of the people. Tensoon's a third, who are known for being rebellious, and then the people below the thirds, like 4th, 5th, any younger than that, they're basically all just like doing whatever the seconds say, other than some of the 4ths who are listening to the 3rds, who have always been rebellious. But Tensoon is on trial because Not only did he break his contract, he also murdered another Kandra, or so, and stole his blessing. And we start to hear about these different blessings that the Kandras have, which sound very similar to allomantic powers or ferrochemical powers. And it's through the epigraphs in this novel that we eventually start to get some information about a third type of metal magic, hemalurgy, which has been present all along, we just haven't had any way to identify it. And as you begin to learn more about hemalurgy, you realise, or I did at least, that this is the key to a lot of the secrets. It fits perfectly, because hemalurgy is all about you transfer powers from one person to a different person by ramming a spike through them and killing them, and then putting that into the second person. And the less time there is between the spike being made and then inserted into the new person, and when I say made, I mean making a sacrifice, the more powerful it is. And that didn't click for me right away. However, it was a bit later that they mentioned something in hemalurgy about having stronger powers if you were already of one power, aka Mistborn like Vin, but then gained another power through that you already had, like a seeker power of bronze, then you could gain advanced powers, which is how Inquisitors are able to pierce copper clouds. And these are conclusions that you can draw if you look into the information hard enough, but they're not explicitly said on the page. The conclusion that is never actually explicitly said, it's like just hinted a bunch, but maybe it's explicitly said right near the end. My memory's struggling on me at the minute. But Vin's earring that she's had all along, that I've been waiting to become relevant since day one, turns out to be a hemalurgic spike, and it's giving her the ability to pierce copper clouds. Not only that, it's giving Ruin the ability to talk to her in the same way that he did to Zane, in the same way that he takes control of the Inquisitors and the Colossus. Ruin can take control of anything with hemalurgic spikes within it, and that isn't something that's something that grows over the course of the novel. So I'm saying it all up front here because I know the information now and you know the information now if you're watching the video, but it's something that comes to light over the course of little tidbits here and there, and it's scattered really well. Perhaps a bit too easy in my liking to pick up on, but I spend a lot of time analysing the exact verbiage. Words are important, and the way that Brandon uses them is very specific, I find. He doesn't use extraneous words, so that means that every word that is on the page is relevant, and it matters, and it means something. He doesn't describe Spook getting stabbed by saying Spook got stabbed. He describes it by exquisite detail of how the sword goes through one person into Spook, and then a bit of it breaks off, and this is hidden, or it's attempted to be hidden anyway. I don't know how much it's meant actually hidden or how many people pick up on it, but I picked up on it straight away. I was like, okay, so Spook gets a hemalurgic spike. And just to catch up with this, the reason why this has happened is because Spook has been spying in Urto, trying to gather information so that Breeze and Cesar can come and help him take the city and the supply cache. And while he's been doing that, the methods that he's been doing that to do so well at it is by constantly flaring his tin, which is something that we were told early that is dangerous for allomancers to do. If they get too used to the metal, it can deal damage to their body, and we do essentially see it damaging Spook because he becomes so sensitive that he can't step outside without having a cloth wrapped around his eyes, and he can't touch things without feeling pain just because he's touched something. It's really weird, and I quite imagine how those heightened senses must actually feel, but it seems like it does more damage than it does good. However, it does give him these really superior capabilities of using his tin and being able to hear things that are way too far away, or being able to feel the movement in wind to anticipate a sword attack and dodge out of the way. So in a way, Spook actually becomes quite a good fighter at this point, and he's coming into his own a bit more as a character. Now, the guy who's ruling Urto, where they are, is called the Citizen Quellion, and he is a Scar. Or, yeah, he is a Scar. He might be half noble, I'm not actually sure. Claims to be Scar anyway, and he rules the people in the Scar's name, and they execute nobles. But it turns out they're not actually executing nobles. They're sneaking some out of the building because those ones are the Allomancers, and the Citizen wants to add them to his army. Because Spook finds out during aforementioned fight while spying, he gets a bit of a thing for the Citizen's sister, Beldre. She's not that much of a character, but it turns out she's an Allomancer. She's the coin shot rather than the Citizen. Spook thinks it's the Citizen. But he gets into a mess because he's going after her. And then it gets stabbed, as I mentioned. One guard stabs him through the chest of another guard, straight through the heart, and into Spook's shoulder, I believe. Which he leaves there. Well, he immediately blacks out, and at first you think he's dead, but when we come back to him in a bit, we find out that he's not dead. He wakes up in a burning house. Which is how the Citizen executes people. He puts them in a house and then sets it on, like a noble house, and then sets it on fire. So Spook wakes up in this house and starts hearing a voice, and then sees Kelsier, like a spirit of Kelsier, I guess. And Kelsier leads him to some allomantic metals that were hidden upstairs, gets Spook to swallow them, and Spook realizes he doesn't have any tin, but he can burn pewter now. So the not obviously explained connection is that comes from the hemalurgic spike. He can now burn pewter as long as he has this spike. The downside is it lets Ruin talk to him through the persona of Kelsier and try and convince him to kill everybody, because that's all that Ruin seems to care about, is destroying the world. So Spook essentially becomes co-opted by Ruin, and he's acting dodgy for quite some time. I was worried for the guy. I thought he was going to go nuts or just generally do bad things, work for Ruin. I totally didn't see it coming that he would actually realise what was wrong with him and fix it himself. And that was an epic moment when he kind of realised something's not right. He was, at the time, attacking the Citizen, and the voice of Kelsier told him to kill Beldre, the girl he had a crush on, by driving a spike through her and then into him. And Spook actually figures it out that, wait, that's what happened to me with that guy's sword. Oh my god, I've still got metal in my body. And then he, like, rips off the Citizen's shirt or something and sees a metal spike jutting out of him. So he pulls it out of the Citizen and then pulls his own out as well, or cuts his own out with a glass dagger. Because he's like, there's something wrong. This isn't what I was meant to be doing. I was meant to be helping these people, not destroying everything, because the city's literally going up in flames around them. So that was just an awesome moment. I didn't think that Spook was going to figure it out. I didn't think that somebody who was spiked by Ruin would have the will of their own to figure it out. I thought that Ruin would suppress that, but that was awesome. And it turns out the Citizen wasn't that bad of a guy. He was just spiked by Ruin himself and doing the things that Ruin was telling him to do, burning all the nobles and building an Allomancer army for Ruin, who were probably spiked as well now that I think about it, although that remains unclear. Maybe they weren't. Essentially, they saved the city and they bring water back to the canals that's been missing for hundreds of years. And it turns out it was being siphoned into a lake in the supply cache. They bring the city back to good. Bree starts administering things. and everything's well there for now. While this is all going on, Vin and Elend have been travelling to Fadrex, where Set is from, to try and stop the Obligator King. I think his name is Yeoman, King Yeoman. He was previously an Obligator and still believes in the Lord Ruler and doesn't believe in his death and rules the city in his stead because his people need stability. He's not a bad ruler from what I can tell. He's just misguided in the fact that he still believes in the Lord Ruler and can't accept the fact that he's dead. He's just too loyal, essentially. But he's not that bad of a guy. However, they think he has the atium, because Vin and Ellen decide to go to a ball he's holding, and they meet him, and he has a bead of atium strapped to his forehead, and they think he's a Mistborn. There's a Mistborn following them around the city. At least that's what Vin thinks, but it disappears every time she tries to confront it, so she's not sure about that. And that turned out to actually be Ruin impersonating Reen, her brother, and we find that out when she gets captured by the Obligator King Yeoman during an attempted reconnaissance of the supply cache left by the Lord Ruler, the 5th cache where they think the atium is. Now, Yeoman had set a trap for them, and he captures Vin inside the storage cache, which is relatively empty aside from some tinned food. I don't know if there was other stuff in there that got taken out. It never quite got made 100% clear because there was other stuff going on at the time that the characters were more focused on in the end. But it turns out he didn't have the atium, he just had a few beads of atium, and he's an atium misting. So there are mistings other than the basic 8 allomantic types, and it turns out you can be an atium misting. However, it's such a powerful, valuable wealth in the world that no one would ever find that out because they're not swallowing atium, you know, unless they think they can burn it because they're a Mistborn. But it turns out there are atium mistings, and maybe that was the secret kept by the Lord Ruler. There are also other metals. We discovered that there's a total of 16 allomantic metals, and 2 of them are still unknown at the end of the series as far as I'm aware. Maybe it's just 1, but I think it's 2. We learn about a new one called Electrum, which is basically just a counter to atium. It stops people with atium from being able to see where you're going. It makes it look like you're using atium even though you're not. And yeah, there's still an unknown metal or 2 at least out there that have god knows what powers or abilities, and I guess it'd be different powers and abilities for allomancers, ferrochemists and hemalurgists independently, so that could go way more in depth, and I'm sure it might in future eras. But for now, Yeoman has captured Vin, and Reen finally appears to her. Reen, her brother, who she believes is dead, is actually dead because it's not Reen. This is Ruin appearing as Reen, and he reveals to her at this point that he has always been Reen. He's always been the voice in her head, making her doubt people and not trust and all of that stuff, manifesting through the spike that she has in her ear, the hemalurgic earring, which of course was something I'd already clocked. However, the connection between Reen and Ruin I thought was really cool, because I've been waiting for Reen to come back in a way since the first book, and he did sort of. So that was a cool moment, a cool explanation. But Vin begins to realize that she can actually trick Ruin because he can't see. He can only like hear what they say or see what they write. But if they're pointing at one thing and then saying another thing, like they can work around him in a way by talking code, essentially, a code that he doesn't understand, and that code is done through trust and emotion, which is the one thing that Ruin doesn't understand. Emotion. He doesn't have any sort of capacity to emote other than anger and pain and death, so it makes sense. And Vin manages to convince Yeoman in the end that they're on the same side. And at this point, Ruin realizes he's lost his pull on her and lost his tool in that area. He sends Marsh in. Marsh comes in and just starts taking over shit. And Yeoman thinks he should allow Marsh to do this because Marsh is an Inquisitor and he still follows the Lord Ruler's doctrine. So Marsh literally says, oh, okay, I don't care if they're retreating and you just agreed that they should do that. March after them, and sends all of Yeoman's armies out of the gate. And then Ruin takes over the Kolos army that Elend had outside from way earlier, which he had actually gone and got some more Kolos when Vin was captured because he figured he'd finally have to attack the city, despite then deciding not to after a conversation with our resident philosophist, Ham. Philosophist? Is that a word? Philosophist? Philosopher? Coining it. Anyway, the Kolos then turn and start killing everyone, and Vin manages to get through to Yeoman and be like, are you really still listening to this guy? Look, he's literally killing everyone. He's going to come here and kill you next. Let us help. Let us in the city and we can defend against the Kolos together. And they do. That's a really cool moment. It's awesome. And one of the ways that they do this, so Elend is thinking about like the myths and stuff during all his time away from Vin, and trying to figure out a connection between why they kill and why they kill exactly 16% of people, and not only 16% get killed, 16% get sick and then 16% of them die, and it's like too much of a common thread. It's too accurate every time. It shouldn't be that accurate if it was natural, so it's unnatural. And he ends up speaking to a spirit of the mists. They manage to sort of have a conversation, but it's through just gestures and questions because the mist spirit itself is incoherent, and it turns out this was actually the mind of Preservation, who was dwindling away and dying at the time. Preservation had put itself into the mists, and Ellen figures out that the people who got sick but didn't die were snapping as allomancers, and some of them are mistings. So they start feeding everyone metal, and basically discover they've got way more misting allomancers than they thought they had. They might even have some Mistborn, but I don't know, it's not specified. But they have a ton of more like thugs and coin shots and lurchers and whatever, and that helps them to fend off as much as they can of the Kolos army. And they manage to hold the gate for a time, and then the army retreats and just begins amassing forces. And at this point, Vin realizes she needs to draw them away, so through a clever conversation with Ellen, she tricks Ruin into thinking that she is going for the Atium stash and that they've had it all along. Because this turns out to be what Ruin is actually after. The Atium is his body. It's a manifestation of Ruin's body. So literally, the power that it gives is the power of a god, which is pretty cool. And it sort of makes sense how not having access to it would make him weaker, but he doesn't seem to have any metaphysical form to be able to get it himself. He has to control other people to do it through the hemalurgic spikes. Like, he can't actually touch the world himself. He just has to touch those that he has control over. And we get back to Tensoon, who, because everything's sort of coming together now, I feel like I should bring it together as well. We get back to Tensoon, who is now in Ertur, gone there thinking he'll find Vin there. He's tried to get his people to listen to him, but they wouldn't, so he escaped instead and went to find Vin. And he doesn't find Vin there, but he finds out that she's in Ertur, and he's about to set off to go there until Sized who's in the next room over having a crisis of faith, hears himself being referred to as the announcer or something, and he realizes that he has a part to play and in divinity himself. And he goes with Orso to the Kandra, because it turns out the Kandra's first generation are actually the original Terrace people that went to the Well of Ascension with Rashek and Alende. They were the other people in Rashek's pack, the other ferrochemists. Rather than risk their power being used against him, the Lord Ruler offered a bargain to the rest of his Terrace people that he would give them immortality in exchange for their ferrochemical powers. And he did this by making them into mist wraiths, and eventually learned to make those mist wraiths into sentient Kandra. Or at least the first generation learned to make more mist wraiths into sentient Kandra, so they could make the further generations. And their job as tasked by the ruler this entire time has been to hoard and protect the atium, because if the atium is used, then it will regrow in the pits of Hafsin, because its energy goes back there somehow. It's not actually a finite resource, it's only a finite resource if it's not being used. If it's being used, it regenerates, which is really cool. So the Lord Ruler has been hoarding it after all. My theory that he'd used it to suppress Ruin, I've had that theory all along, but that turns out not to be true. He was using it to suppress Ruin, but not burning it. He was just keeping it hidden, and it turns out that the Kandra were what was keeping it hidden the entire time. They have it under, like, their main, the trust they call it. It's under a platform in the ground in their caves, basically, which happen to be just outside of Luthadel. So Sezed goes to the Kandra homeland. Tensoon even goes off looking for Vin in Erto, but realizes he's probably too late when he comes across a lava field that's erupting, because the world is literally ending at this point. Like, there's earthquakes all the time, the ashfalls are getting worse, the land is just covered in black. Some of the ash mounts are erupting and lava's everywhere. There's Kolos rampaging around, and the mists have been killing people. Although we have learned by this point that the mists are trying to snap Allomancers and provide humanity with a fighting chance. So once Sezed gets into the Kandra homeland, he manages to convince the first that they need to fulfill the resolution, meaning they pull their spikes out and kill themselves, so that Ruin cannot take control of them and use them to give him the atium. But the second generation disagree with this, and they actually stage like a coup, an uprising, and they lock up all the first generations, taking out their spikes so that they're just mist wraiths, or taking out their bones so that they're just like goo. And Sezed is locked up as well in a little prison, much like Tensoon was earlier on. And he ends up storing a bunch of ferrochemical power into one of the iron locks on his prison, and using it to escape with the help of Tensoon also, who returns to make sure Sezed is okay. And they manage to rescue all the first who are locked up in the jails next to them, and then they go and perform the resolution, basically. The majority of them anyway. Some of the seconds follow Kanpar still, the jerk from earlier, and start taking the atium to Ruin. So Vin, by this time, has reached Luthadel again, using her old horseshoe trick. And she has a confrontation with 13 Inquisitors, including Marsh, and it's not going very well until one of them rips her earring out and the power of the mists comes to her again. And I'd figured that the earring was probably suppressing it through Ruin's influence, and that's why they were starting to shy away from her, because that was a point that kept getting brought up, is that the mist kept like edging away from her, whereas they used to come and touch her. So I figured that was because of the hemalurgic spike. And when it gets removed, I can't remember, like an Inquisitor rips it out, or no, they wouldn't do that, would they? Because they'd know about it. Something happens and her earring gets ripped out, and she's able to then draw on the power of the mists. And the mists have been trying to get into her this whole time. She basically just starts drawing it in, and all the mists in the world are getting sucked into Vin in this tumultuous whirlwind and giving her allomantic powers despite having no metals. In fact, just giving her power in general. And she wrecks like 13 Inquisitors, including Marsh. She just deals with them all, easy, no problem. By the end of this process, she's like blown up Credit Shore in the process as well, the palace that's always been there. And then she's right about to kill Marsh, and she finishes absorbing the mist and disappears. And turns into God, apparently. A god anyway. She turns into preservation. So Vin's gone. Ellen's like, damn, where is she? He's been looking for her. He turned up to Luthadel and ended up with the Terrace people through some logic that he discerned from Lord Penrod's suicide note. It's all quite convoluted, but it comes together in a nice way. I'm just not explaining it well. But Ellen turns up. He's like, we need to feed metal to everyone. And then he realizes where the Kandra are coming out. Some of the second generation of Kandra are coming out of the caverns with Atium. So he goes and figures out what's going on there. Sazed is trying to keep them barred in, and then he helps Sazed and finds the Atium stash. And then it's at this point where he makes the connection between Yeoman being an Atium misting, and they have an Atium supply, and all of Demu, the Captain Demu, all of his retinue that were sent back to Luthadel to try and help Penrod earlier in the book, they were all Mistfallen, and they were all the ones that stayed sick for the longest. They stayed sick for exactly 16 days, which is another sign that preservation, the opposite of ruin, has been trying to leave signs in the number 16 that it's there and it's trying to help. So all of these extra sick Mistfallen that were sent back, because the rest of the army started not liking them, it turns out they're all Atium mistings. So they all go out to fight this ridiculously large Kolos army, knowing that they're going to die, but burning all the Atium were in the process, and removing Ruin's body from the world until it has time to regrow. And it's at this point that Ruin's losing a lot of power, so Vin smashes her own against him, knowing that she's gonna die. Well, she's already dead, she's ascended and become a god, but she knows she's gonna destroy herself, but she has to destroy Ruin, which is the one thing preservation could never do. It can't destroy, it can only preserve. So it created humans with some element of preservation and with some element of Ruin, so that the humans could eventually ascend and destroy Ruin and preserve humanity. And Vin suicide bombs into Ruin, and as their human bodies come back on Earth, Vin's body and whoever was in the mind of Ruin, I don't know about him, but might learn in some other area of the cosmere about him, I think it was a him, they start leaking, like basically mist and dark fog, which is what we've seen either of them represented by through the course of the series. And Sazed starts taking this power, and he realizes that he will bear the weight of the world's future on his arms, which was a prophecy, is reference to his copper mines that he keeps on his arms. So Sazed takes both powers, Ruin and Preservation, and combines them into one, a form of harmony, and then right before ascending godhood, he downloads all the information from his copper mines into his mind, so he has the perfect knowledge of all the religions, whatever they worshipped, their pleasant doctrines, the reasons that were beautiful for them to exist, that he'd loved all along. He uses them to remodel a beautiful planet that the people should be able to thrive on. He fixes the ash falls, he makes green plants grow again, and basically fulfills Kelsier and Mare's dream that there would be flowers once more. And I thought this was a phenomenal end. Apparently it's divisive, but I loved the ending. Szed has been my favourite character for the entire books. Like, since the first book, I've loved him, I've wanted to know more about him, and I totally didn't expect him to end up being the hero of ages because it was so heavily implied that Vin was. I actually wondered if Elend was for a time as well, because I thought Vin was so obviously implied that it must be a misdirect. I was wondering if Elend would eventually become the hero of ages, but it turned out to be Szed, and I couldn't be any happier for it because he's the best. Him and Spook really came through in this book. We spent less time with Vin, and I appreciated that because it gave the other characters a chance to shine. Spook got to really learn who he is and get over the fact that he's not Kelsier. He's not going to be the guy that stands out, but he can be a guy that makes a positive difference through whatever it is that he does do. And Szed found his faith again and realized that these people are going to need someone to watch over them, so he becomes their god. And he reforges the earth, and he puts all the supply caches which humanity have hidden in next to each other so that they all emerge afterwards and they have a beautiful new planet to inhabit. And that's the end of the first era of the Mistborn trilogy. Honestly, this book was great. It finished out the series in such a fantastic way. When I first started book 1, I was unsure if I was going to enjoy Mistborn, but book 2 really got me invested in what was going on in the world. I really wanted to understand the magical forces and the larger elements at play, what was going on. I have to give a shout out to Human, the Kolos, who thinks he's human and calls himself human. That guy was pretty cool. He was pretty cool. I liked Human. We liked Human. I mean, I still liked Set as well, even though we didn't get as much of him really in this book. When he did turn up, Set was interesting, and I liked how he became a contrast for Ham in the same way that Breeze was always a contrast for Ham. As far as the Lord Ruler, we get a different perspective on him from this book, as he's actually left a breadcrumb trail of things behind to try and save humanity. We discovered that his intentions were always good. He just didn't understand the power that he was using to change the world when he ascended at the Well of Ascension all that time ago. So he did things wrong. He put the planet too close to the sun, and it became too hot, and then he created the Ashmans to try and cool it down, but that made the ash fall, so then he made the plants able to survive in the ash, but that made them have less nutrition, and it was just a chain of events. Like, he didn't understand how to use the power that he had, which is why Szed ends up being the right one to use it, because he has all the knowledge of how to actually manifest this power in a correct way to achieve the effects that he desires, rather than throwing everything out of balance and creating all these future problems for humanity. We also discovered that the Lord Ruler himself was spiked in some way. He had hemalurgic spikes, so that was keeping him under the control of Ruin, or not under the control, but at least under the influence of him, and maybe some of the reason why he subjugated the Scar in such a way as he did for Ruin's plan for destruction, rather than because he was actually evil. I don't know how evil Lord Ruler was. He seemed fairly altruistic, just very misguided, and that misguidance came from Ruin, I believe. It was essentially a way to redeem himself through these metal plaques that he left behind that Ruin couldn't read. Yeah, I feel like I've talked about pretty much everything in the series. I really enjoyed Mistborn. I thought it was great. I'm not planning to move on to Era 2 right away. I don't know if I will, actually, because I heard it's like a Western gunslinger, and that sort of environment doesn't really interest me, so I might give it a miss, but may get there eventually. As far as the Hero of Ages, I'd give this, I think, a 7.5 out of 10. The only reason I wouldn't give it an 8 is because, well, I should probably give it an 8, so it'd be like 4 stars. the ending was phenomenal, like the last, I don't know, this amount of it, but that bit, there was a bit of like slowness in there. So it's not quite a 9 out of 10 for me. Nothing is at a 10 out of 10 for me other than certain Wheel of Time books, and the series as a whole is a 10 out of 10 for me. But it's a solid conclusion to a solid trilogy, and I'm looking forward to getting into more of the cosmere. I actually bought the first 6 books of the Stormlight Archive. I've got the first one right here, and when I say the first 6 books, these copies that I have are actually split into part 1 and part 2. So the Way of Kings is 2 books because the originals are like over 1,000 pages each. So this one's got like 600 pages in it, and it's the first half of the Way of Kings, which is the first book in the Stormlight Archive. So I'm going to be moving on to this next, right after I finish Elden Ring, because I've only got one more zone left to do on that. So look out for more Cosmere videos, because I'm going to carry on reading the Cosmere and talking about it on the channel, reviewing these books, and I've had a couple of ideas for board games based on the Cosmere, card games based on the Cosmere, based on Mistborn. I just need to flesh them out more by reading more. So I'll see you next time for the Way of Kings Part 1. If you enjoyed the video, please do leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think of Mistborn, what you'd like to see if you were playing a card game or board game. I'd love to know about that. And just let me know your thoughts. I love talking to people about books and series that I enjoy. I've always loved the Wheel of Time fandom and getting into discussion online and stuff. But I'd love to talk to more people about Mistborn and Cosmere and Brandon Sanderson's works. So come have a chat, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time. Tai'Shar.